Sitting president of South Korea recently paid a short visit to the White House. Now, in meeting U.S. President Donald Trump, both leaders sat down and discussed extensive collaboration on this political and also this economic agenda. There's no surprise that today, when we look at the nation of South Korea, politically speaking, this nation is standing at the crossroads. And meanwhile, religious movement and also create much greater noises. How do we understand the nation today, especially from the religious perspective, and also when we look at the younger generations, not only in the US and also across the world? Younger generations today are voicing strong opinions towards political and social movement. And what does that say about the people around the world? How do we know the future of the world can be dependent upon the younger generations? Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to invite our distinguished speaker, who is Mr. William Federer. Mr. Federer is a nationally known speaker and best-selling author, and his new book is called Courageous Christianity: How a 19th Century Revival Sparked the Muscular Christianity Movement, YMCA Athletics, and a Youth-Led Race to Save the World. Well, Mr. Federer, and welcome back to The Missing Piece.
Will, good to be with you.
Well, Mr. Federer, this is a fascinating book that I must talk about. Again, let's talk about this book. The book is called Courageous Christianity: How a 19th Century Revival Sparked the Muscular Christianity Movement. Can you share with us what motivated you or inspired you to write this book, and why today, when we look at our nation is standing at the crossroads, politically speaking, why is it crucial for us to understand this Christian foundation which will continue to guide us through different generations? Your thoughts?
Well, thank you. So the book is co-authored with my son, Michael Federer, and he was a YMCA instructor and helped to run the YMCA in downtown St. Louis and the Spirit, Mind, and Body Triangle. And so we got into the history of the YMCA, and it started out of the Second Great Awakening Revival. So America becomes independent of Britain, and you have a period where a lot of French thought is coming over, and the people are falling away from their faith, and they're teaching secularism in the colleges. And there's a young attorney in New York named Charles Finney. He's in a little town called Adams, New York, and he's walking to his office going through some woods. And he felt the Lord tugging on his heart to surrender his life, and he kept putting it off. Finally, he said, north of the village and over was a hill, lay a piece of woods, which I was almost daily in the habit of walking by. As I went over the hill, it occurred to me that someone might see me. So great was my pride. As I turned to go in the woods, I recollect having said, I will give my heart to God, or I will never come down from here. And after several hours of praying, he felt the presence of the Lord, goes back to his office, says goodbye to his law partner, closes the door, and he said that he met Jesus, right, mentally, but he felt the love of God. He said waves of liquid love, felt the presence of the Holy Spirit. And he didn't realize he had prayed all night. And the door of his law office opens, and it's a church deacon suing another church deacon, wanting to know how his case is coming along. And without hesitating, Charles Finney said, I have a retainer from the Lord Jesus Christ to plead his case, and I cannot plead yours. Well, the deacon was so stung, he stood in the middle of the street and then finally dropped his case. And Charles Finney presented the gospel like an attorney before a jury at a trial. And after he presented the evidence, he demanded a verdict. And he called for people to stand up where they were and commit their life to Christ. And he said, you serve the devil openly, I'm going to call for you to serve the Lord openly. Well, his message got written down, called Lectures of Revival. Over 100,000 people came to Christ during this 1831-32 revival.
Wow.
And one of the people that heard him was John J. Shippard. He founded Oberlin College. And that started the abolitionist movement to free the slaves. And someone else read Charles Finney's sermons, William and Catherine Booth over in London, and they started the Salvation Army, originally to rescue little girls out of sex trafficking in London. Terrible people would go into a poor family and say, "Give us your daughter, we'll give her an education." When they get her out of the house, they sell her into a brothel. Catherine Booth said, "I felt as though I must go and walk the dens and besiege the streets where these hellish iniquities are going on. To keep quiet seemed like being a traitor to humanity." And so the Salvation Army went on to start rescue homes and missions all around the world. And then someone else who read Charles Finney's sermons was George Williams. So London had the Industrial Revolution. Railroads brought young guys from the farms to the factories. And the city was filled with crime, prostitutes. If you saw the Charles Dickens Oliver Twist was set during this time period. And this young guy, George Williams, is 21 years old, and he's a Christian. And he said, "Well, I don't want to go to taverns and bars. Let's have a place where young men can read the Bible, pray, and exercise." And he called it the Young Men's Christian Association. And so London was having a exposition at the Crystal Palace, a big exhibition center, and people from around the world came. Well, the YMCA had a booth there, and people saw it and went back to their countries. And now it's an international organization. You have a sea captain, brings it back to Boston, starts a YMCA. You have Henry Dunant, starts a YMCA in Geneva, Switzerland. And Henry Dunant went on to found the International Red Cross. You had the different sports start with the YMCA. One of the YMCA instructors, James Naismith, invented basketball. So in Springfield, Massachusetts, the YMCA headquarters, they had a gym, and it was wintertime. And his boss, Dr. Gulick, who came up with the spirit, mind, and body triangle that the YMCA was known for, Dr. Gulick goes to Dr. James Naismith and says, "Can you come up with something a little more interesting than jumping jacks?" And so James Naismith tacked a peach basket on the wall of the gym, and they would throw a soccer ball in it, and they'd get a ladder and get the soccer ball out, but finally the bottom fell out of the peach basket and it would turn into a hoop. And then they would tackle each other. And so he came up with 13 rules for playing basketball. They printed it in the YMCA newsletter, and it went worldwide. And it was the best evangelism tool. So you're in a foreign country trying to preach the gospel. It's pretty difficult. But if you just play basketball, and the young guys see it, it looks like fun. "Hey, you want me to teach you how to play? Come on over." And they come over, you play, you become friends, you get winded, you sit down, and somebody opens up a Bible, and you have a Bible study. So basketball was the best evangelism tool worldwide. And then another YMCA instructor, William Morgan, invented volleyball. Another invented racquetball, and another softball, and another swimming lessons, and another camping out. So in the 1860s, they had a boys' work program with the YMCA, and they'd take young boys on camping trips. And they would use a book written by a British officer named Baden-Powell, who was in South Africa during the Boer War. And it was a survival book. And when Baden-Powell comes back from the war, the YMCA helps him to do a book tour. And then he gets inspired by the YMCA camps, and he starts the Boy Scouts. And so you have this all starting out of a young guy, 29-year-old Charles Finney, saying he's going to give his life to Jesus, and he's going to be committed. And so now it's affecting the Salvation Army, the abolitionist movement in America, and the YMCA. And then someone went to Charles Finney's church in New York, uh, Jeremy Lamphere. And so there's an economic downturn. Thousands are out of work. And Jeremy Lamphere puts a sign in front of his New York shop that says, "Come in at noon and pray." And a couple guys come in. The next week, a dozen. The next week, 100. The next week, 1,000. Till pretty soon you have tens of thousands of men praying all across America, in Boston, Philadelphia, New York, San Francisco, and nobody's organizing it. It's a spontaneous layman's prayer revival. So someone that was involved in this was a 21-year-old shoe salesman in Chicago, Dwight L. Moody. And he volunteers at the YMCA, and he's doing janitor stuff. Well, he sees an abandoned saloon in downtown Chicago, and he starts a Bible study for children, inner city street kids. And one person saw him, and he was holding a black boy and an open Bible, trying to read the story of the prodigal son. And D.L. Moody couldn't even pronounce the words. He barely could read. And so this person said, if God can use that man, he can use anybody. Well, D.L. Moody was good at recruiting people. So within a year, he had 60 people teaching 600 kids.
Wow.
Within 2 years, he had 1,000 kids. And then Abraham Lincoln's elected president. And he goes from Springfield, Illinois to Chicago, Illinois on his way to Washington, D.C., and he stops off and visits Dwight L. Moody's Sunday school class. And all the kids are in there. And afterwards, D.L. Moody says, Mr. President, is there anything you want to tell these kids? And Lincoln said, I started off as poor as any one of you in this room. And if you do what that man tells you, someday you might be president. And then the Civil War starts, and Lincoln asks for YMCA volunteers. And they start the U.S. Christian Commission. They pass out Bibles, they're medics, they're chaplains. And then after the war, D.L. Moody starts a church, and it grows and grows, and he becomes an evangelist, and he reaches 100 million people through his preaching and his teachings and his Bible schools. Well, one of the people in Chicago that was also influenced was Billy Sunday. That was his name, Billy Sunday. He was a baseball player in the 1880s for the Chicago White Stockings, right? This is before the White Sox. It was called White Stockings.
Right.
And he's coming out of a bar, and he hears singing. It's an inner city mission. He goes, the Lord touches his heart. He volunteers at the YMCA, teaching Bible classes. And then they invent radio. And he's the first one to be a radio gospel preacher. And he preaches to over 100 million people in the rest of his lifetime. And the YMCA invented indoor gyms. They didn't have public indoor gyms. The YMCA also had dormitory rooms that you could rent for $5 a night. This was before the invention of hotels and motels, the YMCA. And then they invented bowling alleys and swimming pools and swimming lessons and bodybuilding. A YMCA instructor, Robert J. Roberts, coined the term bodybuilding. And then you have the Carter Woodson was at the Chicago Wabash Avenue YMCA, and he has a Negro Heritage Week that turns into Black History Month. Black History Month started out of the YMCA. And then a couple guys met to read the Bible at the YMCA, and they decided to start the Gideon's International. It came out of the YMCA. And then you had the first Father's Day was in a YMCA in Spokane, Washington in 1910. And on and on. During World War I and World War II, the YMCA helped the soldiers. And they would have coffee tents and organize R&R, right, rest and recreation. They would help them to write letters home. And also the Salvation Army helped along with other groups. And they together formed the United Service Organizations, the USO. So if you go to an airport, maybe someplace, and they have a USO room so that the military can go in there and have a little rest. Well, that came out of the YMCA.
Well,
You had,
I mean, Mr.
Dale
Federer,
Carnegie.
it's fascinating to hear that how YMCA, again, as you mentioned before, it's not just a place where people can go play sports, can go to the gym to exercise. But I do want to bring another character, another well-known Christian evangelist into our conversation. Of course, the name is Billy Graham. Mr. Federer, let's talk about Billy Graham. In the description of the book, it says Billy Graham attended a Billy Sunday revival as a child and later adopted some of the Sunday's Crusade method. Can you talk a little more about that? Because I mean, again, there's no surprise where Billy Graham, it's not a unheard name in this Christian world or even in this non-Christian world. But how does that relate to Billy Sunday's revival and also to YMCA? Can you tell a little bit more, Mr. Federer?
So Billy Sunday would send people into a city a year ahead of his crusade to meet with all the pastors and to organize prayer meetings. So they would get the whole city to end up praying. They get the politicians involved, and they would set up tents. But Billy Sunday decided to build a wooden auditorium. And they were, back then, before the days of concrete and steel, all the beams were all fitted together perfectly. And then he would donate it to the city afterwards. And there's still one of those buildings in Winona Lake, Indiana. But so Billy Graham did the same thing. He would send people into a city a year ahead of time to network with the pastors, have prayer meetings, and to prepare the altar counselors. So when there's an altar call and thousands come to the altar call, there's people there to pray with them, right? Somebody has to plan. So they plan it all. They get all the churches involved. And then he would, both Billy Sunday and Billy Graham would talk about issues that were in the news that everybody knew about.
Right.
And they would be listening.
Right.
And then they would take the message to Christ. And so it's this idea that you would get everybody engaged in what you're talking about, but the purpose was to get their attention, and then you would end up saying the answer to today's problems is Jesus Christ.
That's right.
And then call for a decision. And that came from Charles Finney. So Charles Finney, D.L. Moody, Billy Sunday didn't just preach, and Billy Graham, at the end of their preaching, they would say, okay, I'm going to call for you now to make a decision. Here's the evidence, like a judge, like a lawyer before a jury. Here's the evidence.
Right.
Now make a decision and stand up and come forward and so forth. Now, another little interesting tidbit is during World War I, the head of the Philippines YMCA, Elwood Brown, he's over in Europe, and he's helping to, in the off time from fighting, he organized sports. And you would have these different athletes from these different countries, and they would be playing softball or whatever, volleyball or whatever. And somebody saw this, a French guy named D. Coubertin. And so he recruited Elwood Brown to help bring back the Olympics. The Olympics came out of the YMCA and this muscular Christianity movement. The idea in the Middle Ages was everything physical is bad.
Right.
And if you want to be spiritual, you have to deny yourself and fast until you're 80 pounds.
Wow.
And yeah, you're real spiritual, but if there's bad people, how are you going to defend the orphan and the widow? How are you going to rescue those that are sentenced to death? How are you going to be the one that's blessed so that you can be a blessing, right?
Right.
To be so when the revival was, no, God made you spirit, mind, and body. And you can surrender all three of those parts to be used by God to help establish his covenant, to help spread his love. So you want to be spiritually strong, mentally strong, and physically strong.
That's right.
And so this is different than the Middle Ages of, I want to fast and be a weakling. It's like, no, you can fast every now and then, but you can be strong so that you can defend the orphan and the widow, rescue those unjustly sentenced to death. And so it was called the Muscular Christianity movement. If you remember the movie Chariots of Fire,
Yes,
Eric
sir.
Liddell, a runner from Scotland,
Yes.
and he's trying to decide whether he should run in the Olympics. And his brother in the movie said, what we need now is a muscular Christian to make folks sit up and notice. So this idea that you can be a strong Christian, and that's the message we need today. Instead of saying, okay, I'm just going to let whatever happens, and all the physical world is I'm just going to ignore it and just spend my time praying. It's like, no, you want to pray, but you also want to be involved and try to establish God's kingdom on earth.
That's right. Well, again, Mr. Federer, this is such a fascinating book. I mean, again, there's no denying that, as I mentioned in the intro, that we all need to read this book. Everyone is very much familiar with YMCA, but by reading your book, there's so many fascinating stories and unheard stories that came out and continue to resonate with all of us. Now, Mr. Federer, I want to ask you about your upcoming trip to South Korea. As we mentioned before, South Korea, this nation, is standing at the crossroads, particularly when we look at the news headlines and political complications and religious movements, etc. Can you tell us briefly, Mr. Federer, why is it crucial for us to pray for the nation and what is happening to the nation? And most importantly, your trip to South Korea, what kind of message are you going to bring to the Christians in the nation and also to non-Christians in South Korea? Your thoughts?
Well, I wrote a book. It's called Silence Equals Consent, The Sin of Omission. And it goes through, like at a wedding ceremony, if you're silent, you are giving consent to the wedding, right? The minister, the traditional, anyone who is against this wedding, speak now or forever hold your peace.
Right.
Well, if you're holding your peace, you're actually giving your consent.
Right.
And so the idea is, if there's evil taking place in your country and church members are being silent, they are giving their consent to the evil. And then I give history of the church. For most 1,500 years, you had a top-down church structure, and the Bible was in Latin, and the priests would interpret it from Latin and then teach the people in their German, French, and English languages. And then there's the invention of the printing press, and everybody can have a copy of the Bible.
Right.
And so in the Reformation, you had congregational church structure. So instead of it top down, it's more of a bottom up. Instead of you watching the minister give the sermon, the minister is teaching you to do the work of the ministry. Instead of you watching him do the work of the ministry, he's teaching you to do the work of the ministry. And so everything that's alive takes in and gives out. Every muscle to grow has to be exercised. You don't just hear a good sermon. You hear a good sermon and then fill with the Holy Spirit and fill full of the Word of God. You go out where there's a need and you let the Holy Spirit use you to meet the need.
Right.
And so the Reformation happens, and you have pilgrims fleeing to America, and they were going to go to Jamestown, which was a king-run colony, but they get blown off course to Massachusetts. There's a beach, there's no buildings, there's no government. And the captain says it's too dangerous to sail, get off the boat. And they don't know what to do. So they do the Mayflower Compact, which is what? It takes their congregational church structure and they make it their civil government structure. Everybody's involved in church. Everybody's involved in city government.
That's right.
And so you had these Pilgrims and Puritans, churches founding cities. So Providence, Rhode Island was founded by Pastor Roger Williams and the First Baptist Church in America. Hartford, Connecticut was founded by Pastor Thomas Hooker and the First Congregationalist Church in America. You literally had pastors and churches founding cities. So everybody's involved in church, the congregational church model, and everybody's involved in city government because it's the church founding the city. There's no non-church members to be lazy and let them run stuff. And so the they had a building in each town called the meeting house in the center of town. And that's where the pastor would teach the Bible, and that's where they would do their city business. The word synagogue in Hebrew means meeting house. That's where the rabbi would teach the law, and that's where they do their city business. Why build a separate building just to talk about a different topic? And so this became the foundation of the U.S. Constitution. We, the people, we're running ourselves. We're ruling ourselves bottom up. We're not submitted to the King of England who wants to rule us top down.
That's right.
And it worked. But after a century, it got a little dry. It got taught at Yale and Harvard academically. God has plans. God has a plan for your life, your marriage, your family, your church, your government. Find out what the plan is, put it into place. And it became spiritually dry. And the Puritans got nicknamed Old Lights. And some took it the next step and said, God has so much planned out. He already knows who's going to wind up in heaven, so don't even bother preaching the gospel. Whoever's supposed to get saved, they'll get saved. And they became unevangelistic, and they got nicknamed Old Lights. Well, in the 1700s, you had the New Lights, and they were evangelistic. And they said the gospel is more than a plan. Even if it's a good plan, you have to have an experience with Jesus. And when you do, your life will change. And you won't do the worldly things you used to do, like bars and brothels and government. Wait, what was that last thing? Yeah, government, it's worldly. If you're really a Christian, you're going to withdraw from worldly things. You're going to withdraw from government. And so you began to have Christians withdrawing themselves from government. Well, wait a second. This is different than the entire century of the 1600s, where you had churches founding cities, and all the church members were involved in the city government because the church was founding the city. And they're like, yeah, we're not going to do that anymore. If you're really spiritual, you're going to withdraw from government. And so if all Christians withdraw, who's left to be involved but the non-Christians? And what are they going to do? They're going to do non-Christian stuff.
That's right.
And they're going to start persecuting the church. And so in the book, I say, where did this idea come from of the church not being involved in politics, in city government? It started in Germany, and you had Martin Luther, separated from the Catholic Church. Some German princes made their kingdoms Lutheran, and the people in the kingdom said, okay, we're Lutherans now. What do we believe?
Right.
And so for the people in the kingdom, it was not necessarily a personal experience. It was just a new state doctrine. So this revival movement starts called Pietism, that said being a Christian is more than doctrine, even if it's really good doctrine.
Right.
You have to have an experience with Jesus. And when you do, your life will change. You won't do worldly things anymore like bars and brothels and government. And these Lutheran pietists lived in a area called Moravia. And so they were called Moravians, and they became missionaries. And they took the gospel to countries around the world, India and Iceland and the American Indians in Georgia and all around the world. And they brought with them the gospel, that it's more than doctrine. You have to have a personal experience with Jesus. But they would also bring with them this byproduct of, if you're really Christian, you won't get involved in politics. Now, it actually helped them to gain access to kingdoms by assuring the king that they weren't going to overthrow him. So the king was like, okay, you're not going to get involved in politics. Fine, come on into the country and help everybody become honest, you know. But that's the seed that missionaries planted in countries around the world. It's good, right? You have personal experience with Jesus, but don't get involved in politics. And now Romans 13 says, let everyone be subject to the governing authority. Well, in a monarchy, the governing authority is the king.
That's right.
But in a republic, the citizens are the king. The word citizen is Latin, and it comes from the Greek word polites, which means the same thing as citizen, but it means a co-ruler, co-sovereign, co-king, what's called popular sovereignty. The population is the sovereign. The population is the king. And so in a monarchy, subjects submit to the king. But in a republic, the citizens are the king. And so when the missionaries would go into countries that, you know, they planted this seed of non-involvement, and if the country maybe broke free from the communists and set up a republic and set up, you know, a nice where the citizens are in charge, but the church is teaching this old Moravian Lutheran pietist idea that, oh, we're not supposed to be involved. What happens is non-Christians end up getting involved. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Don't get involved in government because it's worldly. Well, why is it worldly? Because we're not involved in government. All the Christians have left. Well, what do you expect to happen? Non-Christians are going to get in power, and they're going to do non-Christian stuff.
That's right.
And so the idea is that we need to have a personal experience with Jesus, but we need to realize in a republic, we also have a responsibility of being a co-ruler, a co-sovereign, a co-king. So the church needs to release, so the pastors have the king in their congregation every Sunday. So in a republic, the people are the king, and people are in the church, and the pastor is talking to the people. The pastor is like a counselor to the king. And so some counselors tell the king to go to sleep. Yeah, your country's going down the drain. It's having all kinds of problems, but don't get involved. Just be spiritual. And so other pastors say, wait a second, this is a republic. And you the church member in the pew, you're a citizen, you're a co-ruler, you're a co-sovereign, you're a co-king.
Right.
And they throw ice water on them. And they say, wake up. You don't just have the freedom to vote. You're responsible to God. That if things go wrong, it's your fault. You're the negligent king. The pastors need to be like Nathan to King David, saying, thou art the man. You're the one that sinned. You've been sitting back. And if you think, oh, we're spiritual, we don't want to get involved. You're not spiritual. You're giving your consent to the evil, right? You're being silent. Like in a wedding ceremony, you're giving your consent. Well, if there's evil stuff going on in the community and the church members are silent, they're giving their consent. And if you give consent to sin, you're an accomplice to the crime, and you will share in the judgment. So it's going to be a rude awakening for church members who think they're being spiritual by not being involved in politics, when they realize by their silence they're giving consent to all the evil. They're inviting the judgment of God on their heads.
Well, I mean, again, Mr. Federer, that's such a fascinating analysis and help us to understand, as a Christian today, it is our responsibility not only to walk with Jesus on a daily basis and also to get ourselves involved in modern day affairs, in government, in politics, and most importantly, that we need to stand together, continue to pray for the brothers, sisters, and pray for the nation who are actually suffering in many ways. Well, again, ladies and gentlemen, it's such a great honor to speak to Mr. Federer, and I strongly encourage everyone go online to check out this amazing book. It's called Courageous Christianity. And there you go. He's holding both books. Again, Mr. Federer, it's a fascinating author, and he has written so many books. Again, Mr. Federer, thank you so much for your time. We will continue to pray for your trip overseas, and we'd love to hear from you when you're back to the States. I want to tell us all the fascinating journey and the things that you're going to see internationally. So thank you so much for doing this.